Our next session will examine how these dynamics play out in policymaking, particularly regarding recent efforts to include caste as a distinct category in anti-discrimination laws. While these initiatives are often framed as efforts to promote equity, they raise serious questions about unintended consequences, targeting of specific communities, and the creation of new forms of discrimination under the guise of inclusion. For many in the Hindu American community, the push to codify caste in non-discrimination policies feels less like protection and more like the legalization of bias and Hinduphobia. To explore these complexities, we are honored to welcome Ramya Ramakrishnan ji, the National Director of Community Outreach at the Hindu American Foundation, also known as HAF. In her role, Ramya ji leads community-focused projects and outreach, including national policy and education initiatives. She serves as the HAF's law enforcement liaison and has been a strong advocate for the Hindu community, organizing conferences and events to educate lawmakers and other leaders on key issues. Her work includes spearheading a mental health PSA in collaboration with the Department of Health and Human Services and moderating panels on topics such as immigration and anti-Hindu hate. Ramya ji holds a master's in communications from Ohio University and a bachelor's in visual communications from Loyola College, India. Her leadership extends beyond HAF as she chairs her local high school's site council, advocating for students and equality education. Her deep commitment to community engagement and her multifaceted experience provide valuable insight into how policies and initiatives can uplift marginalized communities. Today, she will walk us through the implications of caste-based legislation, challenging us to ask, are we solving a problem or creating a new one? Please join me in welcoming Ramya ji.
Thank you so much for that welcome, Adya. Namaste, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm Ramya Ramakrishnan from the Hindu American Foundation, and we have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to go really fast. But before we start, I want to state that this presentation may not be copied, altered, distributed, or recorded in whole or in part without the explicit consent of the Hindu American Foundation. And for those who are tuning in from the phone and may not be looking at the screen, I want to say that the topic today is legalizing Hinduphobia. Are we solving a problem or are we creating a new one with caste as a novel non-discrimination category? And for the next several minutes, I'll be discussing the codifying of Hinduphobia in corporations, college campuses, and government. Let me share my screen for everyone. Hang on just a minute. I'm going to assume everyone can see my screen and my audio is fine, unless I hear otherwise from the organizer. Moving right along. Caste cows karma. We've heard this before. The trifecta of stereotypes that Hindus and Hinduism are reduced to. Today, we will focus on the codifying of caste, which is perhaps the most insidious of them all. Caste is complex and misunderstood. Those seeking to codify caste falsely claim that the oppressive caste system is integral to Hinduism and Hindu life. As Hindus, we know nothing could be further from the truth. And yet, this anti-Hindu trope persists. Caste is one of the most complicated and misunderstood concepts when Westerners attempt to understand India and Hindu teachings and traditions. You can ask 10 different experts what caste is, and you'll get 10 different answers. Despite caste having no universally agreed upon definition, sadly, both Hindus and non-Hindus alike have internalized the stereotype that erases our identities, diversity, and history. The stereotype holds that there exists and always has existed a pan-Indian pyramid of oppression. Hindus ostensibly oppress other Hindus on the basis of this spiritual purity, The evil priestly class is on top and lord over everyone, and especially mistreat the laborers at the bottom. But where does this stereotype actually come from? It is European in origin and both reductive and inaccurate. Colonial British efforts to categorize Indians into castes erased Hindu agency to self-identify and relate to one another, and continues to be regurgitated in American media, education, and now, as we all know, policy. There is erasure of the impact of colonization on Hindu society and erasure of the ways Hindus may have self-identified and related to one another historically and today. Let's look at this graphic here. These are the stats on bullying and bias against Hindu students. And this is based off of HAF's report, Classroom Subjected Bullying of Hindu Students in US Schools, that we did a while back. The erasure of Hindu identity begins at a very young age within American schools. More than 3 out of 5 respondents said that their schools focused on caste while teaching about Hinduism, including claims about the religion and Indian social practice that have long been debunked. Half of the students surveyed reported social isolation due to their religious identity. Bullying specifically on one's religious identity, in addition to many other negative outcomes, point to erasure or loss of identity and faith. This can result in a spiritual crisis or loss of faith, as individuals may question why they're being targeted for their beliefs. For some, faith-based bullying can lead to internal conflict about their religious identity. This might result in attempts to hide or change aspects of their faith to avoid further harassment. The priming of negative associations to Hinduism in K-12 education makes students fearful of self-identifying for the fear of being bullied. The stereotype of caste, be it in K-12 classroom or policies, can also lead to apprehensions or fear of identifying as Hindu publicly, which we can all agree is a form of erasure. Over the past 5 years, there has been an alarming rise in efforts to codify the Hinduphobic stereotype of caste into corporate, college, and government policy. These efforts are a sharp departure from long-established norms of facial neutrality in US anti-discrimination law. Facial neutrality means that a protected class is not associated with any singular race or ethnic group. To simplify this even further, everybody has a race, everybody has a national origin, everybody has a gender identity, not everyone has a caste. In school textbooks, dozens of dictionaries and encyclopedias, and even in the public imagination, caste is exclusively associated with South Asians broadly and Hindus in particular. Therefore, caste policies pose a serious threat to the rights of Hindu Americans to due process, equal protection, and religious liberty. Let's look at some examples. Everybody tuning in today must have heard about the Cisco case. This got international attention. In 2020, California Civil Rights Department sued Cisco Systems on behalf of an Indian origin, John Doe, who claimed that his 2 Indian origin managers discriminated against him on the basis of his caste. John Doe claimed that he was discriminated against by his Brahmin bosses because he was a Dalit. One of these bosses was a former classmate of him and actually recruited him to his job at Cisco. John Doe got a package worth millions of dollars. The former classmate was irreligious, did not identify as a Brahmin or not even as a Hindu, and he had published a lot of blogs about this much earlier. The state of California, however, assigned both Indian origin managers accused of discrimination a religion and a caste, erasing their own self-identity without consulting them or asking for their opinion. A third Caucasian manager was alleged to have engaged in identical behaviors deemed casteist, yet California only brought caste discrimination charges against the 2 Indian origin managers. A scholar activist also offered to conduct a caste audit if the state demanded a name of all the Indian origin employees at Cisco. The state defined caste as an integral belief of Hinduism, a flagrant violation of the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment, which prohibits government from establishing or defining any religion. Mainstream media, as we all know, was on overdrive about this case, selectively reporting the facts to fit into the pyramid stereotype, as well as amplifying an unscientific report by Equality Labs, which equates caste and caste discrimination with Hinduism and South Asians. Let's not forget that Equality Labs, a for-profit company, sells DEI caste discrimination training, did a study on caste discrimination, and the study was so unscientific that it was not even allowed in court. Together, this has resulted in anti-Hindu posts on internal company chat channels, demonization of Hindu practices like being a vegetarian, taking children to Balavihar, or attending temple ceremonies, or celebrating our most sacred festivals like Diwali and Holi. This has created a very uncomfortable and intimidating atmosphere for Hindu workers. When diversity and inclusion staff are approached for support, they too regurgitate the inaccurate and negative stereotypes to Hindu employees who express concerns. The end result? Keep your head down, don't talk about your Hindu identity practice, and this is very much a form of erasure. Now let's explore what's happening at college campuses. Groups like Equality Labs have also infiltrated college campuses, trying to erase Hindu practices by claiming that celebrating festivals like Diwali and Holi are casteist and oppressive. I'm sure many of you may have seen their Holi against Hindutva and all these posters attacking our most sacred and loved festivals. HAF is supporting 2 professors who have sued the Cal State University system for its caste policy. One plaintiff testified how the policy has created erasure of his Hindu faith. He is afraid to talk about his religious beliefs or celebrate holidays openly for fear that someone may assume he may be engaging in casteist practices. To combat the erasure of outward manifestations of a Hindu identity or Hindu practice, HAF is proactively engaged legal counsel of universities like Penn, Rutgers, and University of Minnesota, outlining the risks of litigation exposure should the universities adopt a caste policy. All 3 institutions have since opted not to pursue the proposals. Now let's turn to state and local governments, who have also jumped into the caste policy bandwagon despite serious constitutional questions. In 2023, a coalition headed by Equality Labs sponsored a bill in California, SB 403, which most of you must have heard about, that would add caste as a new standalone protected class. Thanks to Hindu community advocacy, the dangerous policy was vetoed by Governor Newsom, concurring with HAF that caste is already covered under existing facially neutral categories like ancestry. So who's really pushing these caste policies and subsequent erasure of public Hindu identity in American schools, businesses, and government? There are financial and reputational benefits to denigrating Hindus and perpetuating misinformation about Hinduism. Equality Labs, the primary sponsor of SB 403, is a for-profit organization that sells fee-based caste competency trainings. These trainings vilify the Hindu faith and Hindus, particularly South Asian. Equality Labs trainings go so far as to teach that Hinduism is the spiritual foundation of slavery and that real Nazis aren't in Germany, they are effing upper class Hindus. And their trainings invoke white supremacy as a comparison to Hinduism. They offer caste competency trainings to corporates. They are involved in most, if not all, campus efforts, utilize network of student activists and scholar activists. They are involved in direct advocacy at the local government level. Equality Labs is propped by a cottage industry of student and scholar activists who have built their careers on colonial tropes about Hinduism, Hindus in India. Others have offered to conduct discriminatory caste audits of Indian origin employees for corporations, of course, for a fee. And who else is pushing these policies? Politicians with clear agendas seeking to elevate their visibility at the expense of Hindus. They perpetuate inaccurate and negative stereotypes that caste system is a Hindu social and religious hierarchy that mandates caste Hindus to mistreat Dalits, that caste is related to color, depressed castes being dark and caste Hindus being fair-skinned and so on. And they falsely equate the four varnas as caste. So what is really at stake here? The erasure of our Hindu identity by those who seek to exploit false negative stereotypes for their own personal gain. Caste policies perpetuate the false trope that oppression is a core Hindu belief, painting all Hindus of Indian origin as inherently bigoted and making them suspect in the eyes of state law. When accused of caste discrimination, Hindu Americans are presumed to be guilty, violating due process and their right to be innocent until proven guilty. Codifying caste policies also harms Hindus and those of Indian origin by making them a legal liability to an employer or landlord, creating widespread discrimination against hiring, firing, promotion, renting to, and even educating Hindus. So are we just sitting ducks? No, thankfully, we have the law on our side. HAF has sued California Civil Rights Department for violating our right to religious freedom and equal protection and worked with employees behind the scenes facing caste conversations in their DEI departments. We have worked with faculty and students in the CSU system. We have worked with policymakers and numerous stakeholders in a number of states and a number of campuses to push back against the ill-informed proposal. We've been able to stave off moves to have caste added in non-discrimination laws on other parts of the country at the state, local, and federal level. All of these interventions and advocacy are opportunities to protect our rights and educate our community, policymakers, and the public at large. First Amendment, a state body, be it a state government or a public university, cannot define religious doctrine. This is part of the First Amendment. California in the Cisco case and the CSU resolutions define Hinduism as equating bigotry and oppression with religious teachings and practices. To this end, HAF has sued California Civil Rights Division for defining Hinduism as having inherent to it an oppressive caste system. County policies, campus policies, and even the state of California in the Cisco case have all failed to offer a workable definition of caste, depriving their students and employees of general fairness as it holds them accountable for something that is undefined. But even if a definition were established, logistical and legal implications persist. In the absence of a workable definition, is the absence of a workable definition fixable? Not likely, because how would a state, college, or company determine what someone's caste is? Would the student or employee have any say? Would their identity be erased and written over by those implementing the policy? Would institutions create a database of only Indian-sounding names and add a category of caste just for them? What about those who don't have a caste identity, as is true for most first and second generation immigrants or mixed ethnic people? Would a caste be assigned to them? Caste policies presume that if an individual is of Indian descent or a practicing Hindu, they must necessarily identify by a caste and therefore discriminate in accordance with a hierarchical caste system. This is a blatant institutionalization of an erroneous stereotype that would create a suspect class. Most importantly, caste discrimination is already covered under existing law. Discrimination based on national origin is already prohibited under US federal law. Many states also prohibit discrimination on the basis of ancestry and/or ethnicity. The Cisco case was filed under numerous categories, including ancestry and national origin, proving that an additional policy was not needed to investigate claims of discrimination. In case law, national origin, ancestry, and ethnicity have all been interpreted as protecting against discrimination on the basis of birthplace, ancestry or descent, culture or language, all of which are social markers that are associated with the various theories and understandings about caste. Caste policies in corporations and campus employers is a clear violation of Title VII, which asserts employees' right to a safe environment free from unlawful discrimination. Caste policies perpetuate negative stereotypes and distorted facts about employees of Indian and Hindu origin, segregating people on the basis of national origin and creating a hostile environment. Caste policies in schools and universities also violate Title VI. Although Title VI does not include religion, both the Department of Education and courts have interpreted national origin to include actual or perceived shared ancestry or ethnic characteristics, including membership in a religion that may be perceived to exhibit such characteristics, such as Hindus, Jews, Sikhs, and Muslims. Caste policies violate Title VI by perpetuating negative stereotypes and distorted facts about Indian, South Asian, and Hindu descent as a matter of policy, creating a hostile environment that denies students a safe environment free from unlawful discrimination. Champions of caste policies for personal gain have also exploited the limited data on caste within the United States, using their unscientific study as proof to elected officials, corporations, and campuses. That is extremely common and requires policy intervention. They fail to disclose the two other scientific studies from reputable entities that have found the opposite. According to a study by the University of Pennsylvania, Johns Hopkins, and the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, the majority of people in the US of Indian descent, which is about 1% of the total US population, do not identify by caste. And less than 5% of that 1% reported having faced some kind of discrimination. In the largest survey conducted of Indians in India, Pew Research found about 80% of all Indians, regardless of their caste, said they had not personally faced discrimination based on their caste in the year prior to taking the survey. And as we know, Pew Research is very well reputed. So what we can do really, it turns out quite a lot. To counteract efforts at erasing Hindu identity, Hindus must take ownership of our own story by exploring our rich history, study and practice our traditions, know the rights, learn to recognize the unjust deprivation of those rights, and most importantly, not be afraid to speak out. From genocides to sacrifices to stories of perseverance to the impacts of colonization or Marxist historicals that continue to shape the predominant narratives about us, as well as our own self-perception, follow your curiosity and consult diverse sources and perspectives to better understand who we were and what our ancestors went through. Know your rights. HAF continues to offer trainings to educate Hindu Americans on what you can and cannot speak out for. HAF has a highly qualified and experienced professional team of subject matter experts in education policy and legal justice. If you're being targeted because of your Hindu faith, reach out to us, and our experts with over 2 decades of advocacy will be happy to help. I want to thank you all for tuning in to this presentation today. Namaste.
Dhanyavad Ramya ji for the informative and thought-provoking presentation. As we just heard, policies framed as tools for justice can sometimes embed bias into law itself, especially when they're based on misunderstandings or oversimplifications of complex cultural realities. Ramya ji's analysis, building on Professor Jusim's earlier insights, show us how good intentions are not enough. We must ask, who is being impacted? Whose voices are shaping these policies? And whose voices are being ignored? The conversation around caste legislation in the US raises fundamental questions about fairness, religious freedom, and unintended targeting of Hindu Americans under the guise of anti-discrimination. As we continue exploring how erasure operates across different domains,